Hello, Matt. Thank you so much for meeting with me. I'm Opal from the Swarm. Super excited to have this conversation around all things recruiting and the ways in which that we can optimize it. So excited to kind of dive into your unique background and go from there. So, in earnest, would you like to chat about who you are exactly?
Sure. Thank you, Opal. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited to be working with Swarm. My name's Matt Maasdam, and I was a SEAL for 20 years and notably ran SEAL training kind of after 9/11, where I ran the first portion of SEAL training, which is the selection portion and includes big things like Hell Week and just kind of when people attrite from the program. And then I ran the last portion of SEAL training where people actually learn the tactics and kind of the fun portion of SEAL training, where people learn to be a SEAL as opposed to the selection portion of things. So in addition to that, let's see, I was a SEAL on the West Coast for a number of years. I went to Harvard for grad school. I was the number 2 in the Middle East for a long time. And then I carried the nuclear codes for President Obama for 2.5 years.
So no small feat. That is extremely exciting. And so kind of what are you up to nowadays, and how is that 20 years of experience segued into your current musings?
So after the Navy and after the White House, I left and I went to Under Armour. And for a number of years, I ran strategy programs and then finished up with e-commerce at Under Armour. And so I broke off from there, and I was a COO for a startup, an apparel startup called RevTown in Pittsburgh. And then from there, I was recruited to be the CEO of PECOS Outdoor, which I'm currently doing. And so it's an outdoor product company, mostly online. And imagine Yeti made a table. So we make really cool outdoor tables, places for people to gather and get outside. And so that's going really well, and I'm enjoying it.
That's amazing. So I think that with the Swarm, it's basically a community of founders, and to be a founder, it's actually quite scary. It can be a little bit intimidating. I think for you, it seems as though you got out of your comfort zone, going from the Navy SEALs and kind of into commerce, which is a little bit unlikely, but kind of walk me through that, like the courage and everything that it took, because I think that's really noble.
Yeah, it's fun. I love to create new things, and so it does get you out of your comfort zone and kind of helps you make a mark on the world.
Absolutely. And so how have you gone on to apply kind of those training lessons and recruiting things into how you run your day-to-day business today?
Well, recruiting is one of those things. I mean, it's if it's not the number one problem in business, it's one of the top few. And finding the right people is tough. And so it's all about, there's so many components to it, but the SEAL teams do a really, really good job of it. And not only what I would break their success down into is 2 things: selection. They do a great job of picking the right people, and then training those people to do the mission that they want them to do. Exactly. And so the selection portion of training, they know the SEAL teams know what they want. They've built a very refined pipeline and process to get that product out of the other end. And so they have an open net all of the time, looking for great candidates. And they keep that candidate pool full, and they put the best people through that they can. And we get a great product out of it.
That's amazing. And so from what I understand, only 25 to 35% of those who start the training actually make it through to the end. And so kind of walk me through how that weeding out process, crystallizes over time.
There's a lot that goes into it. If you're a very prepared candidate, you can get to buds quickly, but Navy has a portion of it too. And so there are filters applied at several levels. And so, but the Navy does a really good job of recruiting people and getting them in the door quickly. And so they sign up and they say, I want to go to buds. And they get them in the door quickly, and then they make sure they take a battery of physical tests and mental tests to make sure that they're the right candidate for SEAL training. And then we work with them after the Navy's initial portion to make sure they're physically fit to come to training. And so that produces a really good product for us to work with, and allows us to apply physical tests that test their mental abilities, right?
Yeah.
And so we're looking for things like courage and passion and teamwork and judgment and integrity. And we use our physical test gates to help us assess those characteristics.
Interesting. And so did those themes kind of play out when you were in graduate school and kind of being like in the founder space as well? Because I feel like there are a lot of intersections that could go from there.
They have. And one of the things that's nice about SEAL training is most people know that it's really difficult, or at least the people who are seeking it out know that it's a hard thing to do.
Exactly.
And that transparency is wonderful. I think if other people were transparent to say, if companies were transparent to say, like, look, this job process is hard, or this job is hard,
Yeah.
I think you would see less attrition once companies have hired folks to know, just knowing it's a bit of a filter all by itself for candidates to know they're going to do something difficult.
Exactly. And so I would say with the physical strength, the mental strength, how do you kind of spot those traits in applicants naturally? So it's like, hey, I want to do this, but it's like, how do you say you're the specific person for the job, and how do you filter out before the training even starts?
I mean, people have to volunteer, so that's the first hurdle. But what I would say is, like, there's a floor that they have to get over, and so a bar they have to get over, and that sometimes that means they have to be able to swim, they have to be able to hold their breath, they have to want to jump out of an airplane, things like that, right? But once those are accomplished, it's really from the neck up. At that point, like, there are all kinds of people that have everything that they need to succeed. They're great leaders, they're good communicators, they're physically fit, they have experience, and they get in the door, but they haven't had to do that in a challenging environment. They've done it in, like, on a sunny Friday afternoon, and then when it's a rainy day, right, when it's challenging, they don't do as well. And so a lot of the times that people think, like, oh, this is my candidate, this one right here is my person, and they won't make it because they haven't been through that gauntlet of bad days before. And so it's interesting to see how people do when they find themselves in a challenging environment.
Absolutely. And I kind of want to take that notion and segue it into when you were kind of in the executive space. How have you kind of used those principles with your, like, direct reports? Of course, you're not in a platoon at this point, but, like, how have you kind of applied those principles to that? Because I see so many different intersections.
There's a lot of places you can apply it. Just knowing what you want, right, I think is the most important thing in hiring, so that you can articulate to people, this is what I'm after. And so there's no ambiguity or lack of clarity on, these are the things that I need for this job to be fulfilled. And so if you're clear up front, you're in much better shape than most people. And then keeping a constant flow of candidates ready to go for the jobs that you see coming up, so you're not making emergency hires. It is really, really difficult, particularly in today's market, to, like, a job necessity pops up and you're trying to fill that job super fast and with questionably qualified candidates. You want to know that things are ready to go. So being clear about what you want, having a constant pool of candidates available, and hiring quickly is super helpful. The Navy does a great job of that kind of for the SEAL teams, but that applies to corporate as well. If you can get people in the door quickly, you have a much better chance of actually retaining that candidate.
And it can be quite difficult. Kind of, how have you recovered, in a sense, if you've fallen short in that space, or if you've seen others fallen short, how do you help them? Because I know the saying goes, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So with that mindset, how did you kind of translate that?
It's tough. I mean, you have to maybe outsource a component of what you're doing, or bring in, your best person to come help with the project, or lean on somebody else to assist. And so those things are unpleasant, and particularly unpleasant is hiring the wrong person.
Yeah, talk me through that, because we know that all too well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the corporate world could do, could model after the Navy and the SEAL teams, is to say, let's give people a try, as opposed to hire them for a really long-term period.
And what does that look like in your practice?
It would be some kind of 1099 event before actually hiring the person on full time, I think would be very helpful. And then retaining the right people. I think once you find somebody who works in your company and they work well, holding on to those people, knowing that how much turbulence is going to be produced by losing good people,
Yeah.
doing everything you can to hold on to the right people. And that doesn't always mean money, right?
Yeah.
So the SEAL teams, some of the best things about the SEAL teams don't have anything to do with money. We get to travel the world. We get to be with great people. We get to be outside and do fun things. And we get to serve our country. And all of those things mean more to a lot of people than a bigger paycheck. And
Exactly.
so I think it's important to identify what those things are for people in the corporate world. For example, at Under Armour, I ran, amongst other things, the call center, the
Oh,
customer center.
yeah.
And I asked people like, hey, what do you want? So there's like 400 people.
Okay.
What do you guys want? And money wasn't in the top. I don't think it was in the top 5. What people wanted was food for
Okay.
like they wanted us to pay for food. They wanted time off.
Okay.
And they wanted parties, right? And so like those are the big 3 things. And like money wasn't on the list, you
Okay.
know. So if I were to, as the leader, provide a little more time off to the performers, you know, lunch for everybody, and have a party on occasion, like my retention goes up. So
Interesting. And
yeah,
so do you think that's like kind of a strategy in recruiting, like a word of mouth like thing that people could say, like, hey, come work with me because we have X, Y, and Z perks? Like, I think that might be kind of a recruiting strategy in
I think it's reflective of the culture. And I think the word about company culture gets out pretty quickly.
Yeah. And how do you kind of foster that more than what, like, kind of diving into that? Because in the remote world, it's a little bit difficult to foster culture. And that's, often what founders are saying. So you specifically, how do you kind of nourish that in this current?
I mean, there's lots of ways to do that, but in this case, listen to your people, right? And so like ask them what they want and actually give it to them. So that seems like an easy answer, but I don't think it's
not easy in practice. And so when saying listen to your folks, would you say, is that by like town hall meetings and all hands, or like quarterly surveys, or what does that look like that you've seen successful in ways that
all of the above? And just getting out and walking around and talking to your people when they're working, right? Show them that you care about who they are as a person and what they want and what makes them happy. And it leads to you as the leader having much better understanding what's actually happening.
Yeah.
It leads to them getting to share with you in a better overall corporate workplace.
So you're saying listening to people makes them happier. Huh. Good concept. It seems easy, but I guess in practice it can be a little bit difficult. And so with recruiting, because I guess now we're talking about retention, but to go a little bit back on recruiting, there's a lot of noise, as we know, and some of that is irrelevant in recruiting and hiring. And so I would say when it came to surfacing the best like Navy SEALs, what methods worked and kind of which ones didn't?
You have to constantly, not constantly, you have to occasionally assess your process and say, is this still working for what we want? Is this producing the right product for the environment that we're in? And so whether the situation changes in the outside world and you have to go to the Middle East instead of Asia to fight a war, like those kind of things matter in the kind of training that you're doing. But more particularly when I ran Hell Week, for example, we looked at how many miles the kids were running over the course of the week. And it had been creeping up and up and up. And it was just because everybody was trying to make things a little harder, or they were adding one more thing. And occasionally you have to kind of re-baseline and say like, no, that's leading to, we also saw a corresponding injury, right?
Oh, okay.
We're like, hey, this isn't leading to better training. Right now it's leading to more injuries. We need to cut back on that running and do something else instead.
And so okay. And yeah, no, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, so we assessed that and we said like, okay, we need to spend more time in the water. I'm making that up, and less time running on land in order to produce a better SEAL, because they need to be better swimmers.
Okay. That's something good. Like ear to the pulse is absolutely important. And so I would say being in the SEALs, it requires lots of physical strength, kind of a lot of tenacity. And so that I think is very much relevant in the startup world when wanting to get your when company building. And so would you say you've applied those principles as well?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, the startup world's a grind. It's a
Yeah.
toil. You know what I mean? It's hard, and the initial stages of not only SEAL training but being a SEAL are very similar. You're low man on the totem pole. You're figuring out all kinds of things that you don't know the answer to, and it requires a lot of effort to do things that maybe you're not an expert in or you're not familiar with. And so, as you go through that, that same tenacity, that same resilience, that same fight, it is applicable to both the SEAL teams and to corporate and startups.
Absolutely. And I know that in kind of startup world, it can be a little bit lonely in that sense, but it's important to have a team. It's important to have accountability. Kind of what did that look like when you were in the building phases at Under Armour and in your previous role and currently?
Yeah, I think leadership is inherently a little bit lonely, but you can seek out other leaders, which is really nice, whether it's in your company or in other companies. When you're in a really small company, there's probably not anybody else to seek out. But when you are in a small company, you can seek out people who are doing things similar in your industry and talk through those issues, because everybody's having the same problems, whether it's recruiting or forecasting or cash flow, whatever it is, everybody has those challenges. And so knowing that you are not alone is wonderful in those situations.
Exactly. And so the Swarm has the community where founders, again, it's kind of the lone wolf founder. And so how, besides leveraging the Swarm that founders can do, how did you find community? Was it by way of finding folks online, word of mouth, introductions? What does that look like?
It's a lot of it's friends and introductions. I did a CEO group as well, and that was super helpful.
Okay.
And so of people in kind of a similar industry. Mm-hmm. Texas has been wonderful to me in terms of they share very quickly and generously. And so I'm in Austin, headquartered in Austin. And so people reach out and I reach out to people and they want to help just to help. Okay. They're not there to like try to get you to buy their thing or repay the favor, right? They just want to see you succeed. And it's really nice from that perspective.
That's playing the long game and really finding the core folks in your community. And I think that is an important lesson to apply in a founding team as well, to like make sure your folks have your back. And so, kind of talk to me a little bit more about community building, because that I think is huge. And again, something that founders are focused on because it's easy to get into your own head.
A lot like finding the right candidate, you have to know what you're after, right? Yeah. And so if you're founding your company on pillars of excellence, right? And saying like, I really care about teamwork. I really care about the outdoors. I really care about the environment. And so finding those things that you really care about, building a community around them, finding other people that care about the same things, and sticking to them, right, is important. So you make that choice to help the environment rather than make 2% more. Okay. Or you give back to conservation of land rather than eke out that little bit more profit. And so those kind of things are important, and it attracts the right candidates and the right people, and they stay because they see you really care about the thing that you said you cared about.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about sticking to your values, but also being open to adapting, because that can be a little bit hard, especially as a founder. It's like, this is my idea, I want to, I have all these visions, and now that I'm bringing more folks onto my team, like I want to remain, really to our core values, but also be adaptive to change. Kind of walk me through how that was at the Navy SEALs and then in your current day to day, because that can be hard.
It is, it's always a challenge to have to adapt. And Under Armour, I'll talk about Under Armour first. I think Under Armour did a really good job of always looking for kind of what was next in terms of technology in apparel and adjusting to the world as they saw it. And so they listened to their customers. they were very innovative and had that as a core tenet of their spirit. And so as they moved forward, that in spirit of innovation, like found new things and applied them, and found new things and applied them, and just kind of kept their mind open to trying new things. And so as they grew, it allowed them to change and incorporate newness while sticking to their values, rather than simply changing direction or ignoring what was necessary to adapt.
Absolutely, because yeah, I think it's interesting because folks can get stubborn, and it's like you want to really, really stay to that, but it's like you also have to be very, very open to change.
You do.
Which is important. And so kind of, yeah, your current view on recruiting with, especially at the early stage, because that's mainly what the swarm is catered to. What kind of advice would you lend to folks who are making that career change, first time founders, and then I guess we could talk about second and third time founders, but specifically for the first time founder, what can they do to kind of not get in over their head?
It depends where you are in that stage, right? Like, know that it's going to be a grind. I would say utilize your network so that you can hire people that you've worked with before, or people that you trust, who have a recommendation. I mean, you really need to make sure that that recommendation is a good one by validating any kind of references and things like that. But using your network is a super important part of success in that early stage.
Absolutely. That community aspect is extremely important. And maybe for the second time founder who, again, might be like, well, I've done this before, not to say they're cocky necessarily, but it's like, you know, one who might be a little bit more or less open to change, but kind of needs to in order to build.
Yeah, I think you answered it, like appreciating that things change, right? And so, and knowing that you have some version of a template to apply to the problem that you're attacking, but that the world has moved on. If it took you a couple of years to do it before, like a lot has taken place in those 2 years, and you're working on a little bit different problem. The world's a little bit different, and sometimes those subtle changes can have huge impacts.
Absolutely. And so with the Navy SEALs, and I guess with the military in general, is really known for their really well-known recruiting practices and hiring incentives, student loan repayments, bonuses, and all of those things. So what are some lessons that startups can learn from that?
You know, those things, and I'm interested to know if this applies to startups.
Yeah.
This didn't really apply to the SEAL teams. Like, nobody says, meaning it's not a reason people join the SEAL teams. Nobody says, like, I want the hardest, most dangerous route to repay my student loan possible, right? Really? And so people want to be SEALs for different reasons, but it isn't to repay their student loans. It may be an ancillary benefit of what they come to do. Yeah. Where the bonuses really apply for us is in retention. So people come to be SEALs because they want the challenge. They want that hard thing. They want to serve their country and be with a great group. In order to keep those people as they mature and to make it a competitive salary, we need those retention bonuses. And that's where the SEAL teams use things like bonuses. But they tend to not attract people up front with bonuses or loan repayment. I mean, the SEAL training all by itself is an incentive for the Navy, because like you said, you know, it's like a 70-30, 70% of people fail, 30% of people succeed, but all those people stay in the Navy. And so that 70 people that go into the regular Navy, like the Navy loves that the SEAL teams have provided that for them. So it's a bonus all by itself.
Exactly. And so with those folks who, I wouldn't say failed out of SEAL team training, because it's never a failure, but the folks who have gone through the SEAL training and then ultimately do go back into the Navy, do they kind of have an advantage in a sense, or have you kind of seen them move a little differently than folks who haven't attempted SEAL?
Typically they get to try again if they'd like. And so sometimes it's just what I'll say is a maturity issue. Sometimes people are too young when they get there to training, and they're just not quite physically ready for it or mentally ready for it, and they have an opportunity to come back. I think service to your country is service to your country. It doesn't matter if you're a cook on a ship or if you're a Navy SEAL, like it's all service to the greater good. And so I don't place value, on one over the other. I do think that those people, most of the people who leave buds do so voluntarily. Okay. It's not because they got hurt or because they got kicked out. It's because they decided that it wasn't for them. And that's a reasonable choice. Like you're cold and wet and tired and miserable a lot. And you realize that SEALs are cold and wet and miserable and tired. Yep. And you don't want to do that for the next 20 years. You know what I mean? So I understand the choice to leave. And there's no shame in that. It's wonderful to try, and it's wonderful to serve your country on the backside, regardless.
No, I hear that. And I think that's interesting to kind of segue into founders when they have this idea and, failed. We see often failed startups. And again, I don't really like to use the word failed, but it's like, rats, like I tried this out, I got the funding, everyone believed in me. And now, I feel like I fell short, but it's like picking yourself back up. How do you kind of see that? And how have you kind of coached folks who have experienced that before? Because I'm sure it's common.
Yeah, it's hard, like SEAL training is hard. Not succeeding is hard, but I think if you look at it as a learning lesson rather than a failure and apply it to the future and your future, it'll just make you a stronger person overall. So, and a better, and better at business. Absolutely. So it's not a failure. It's just a learning tool, and you can keep going.
Absolutely. And how do you say you would apply that to recruiting and team building? Because again, I think there are a lot of segues in that mindset.
I mean, that's a tough one. I suppose if somebody doesn't do well in the job that they're currently, in the job that they're hired to do, that doesn't mean that they're not a good person. It doesn't mean that they're not good at things. Like if you ask a fish to climb a tree, it can't do it. But if you ask a fish to swim, it's fast. And so, find that right place for you and you'll succeed.
Absolutely. And so kind of pivoting into, again, your current day to day, what are kind of the surprising things that you've seen over time with regards to recruiting and retention?
In terms of, I'll just say, like, in terms of startups, people are unprepared for the breadth of work that they're going to have to do. So we hire experts to do operations or finance or supply or whatever it is. And they find themselves occasionally having to do other things because you're on a small team, and that some people aren't ready for that, right? They're like, but that's not my lane. And I'm like, I know but somebody's got to do it, and we can't hire everybody in the world. And so that's always a challenge. Let's see. I think people need understanding how hard they're going to have to work at a startup is tough. Absolutely. Like you put in a lot of hours, and not all of it is immediately fruitful. Yeah. So it takes a long time for that seed to grow. And what the public sees is kind of like a startup from year 10 to 15. Mm-hmm. They're like, wow, this company came out of nowhere. Yeah. Actually, it was a ton of blood, sweat, and tears for. Yeah,
we've been here. It's like, wait, now, we just got our Wall Street Journal feature, but we've been doing this for years. I totally agree with that.
And so I think a lot of people think that they're going to jump on a startup and it's a rocket going to the moon, and like it's a rocket like fueling, right? Yeah. And it fuels for years before that takes off. So understanding that time perspective is hard too.
Yeah. How do you kind of curtail that impatience? Because again, you can look, it's so easy now with, swiping on your phone and looking on, LinkedIn, seeing all these things, like naturally it's going to be like, I want to do it faster and faster, but how do you kind of teach that patience?
It's hard. Some people are naturally patient and some people are naturally.
I know I'm not.
I'm not an example of patience. But like kind of keeping people's eye on the ball and keeping them focused on the same thing over and over and over and over and over again helps a lot. And so letting people know that the effort that they're making does matter, that it is an incremental process, and that eventually you'll hit that spark and things will take off. But it takes time and it takes a lot of hard work.
And how do you know when you got that spark? I guess, is it kind of natural, or are there certain indicators one should look out for? Kind of walk me through that.
I think it depends. So sometimes that spark you make, sometimes that spark comes out of left field. And so sometimes it's just a timing issue. And so you don't quite know what it's going to be, but if you fight long enough, it'll be there.
Okay. So perseverance and tenacity is kind of the theme. And so in our last couple of minutes, I want to open the floor to anything you want to know on my end, or kind of advice that you want to give to founders. I want to share space for you.
I mean, let's see. Stick with it. Advice to founders in terms of how's everything going at the Spark now that you were at Sequoia and you left?
Yes. So I was really enjoying the founder facing part of my time at Sequoia. And so what I was doing specifically was sourcing. So I would provide candidates to various founders within the portfolio, and then they would go out and contact them, and I would help them with kind of messaging and job descriptions and things like that. But specifically with the Swarm, I'm going to be focusing more on community and more being founder facing, because that was only a little bit of what I was doing at Sequoia, but now this is full time. And so seeing kind of the grit and the tenacity that folks were having to work, or founders that were working through at Sequoia, was something that I see now, and that I think that I can empower founders to, again, stick with it and kind of have a little bit more of a voice. Mm-hmm. I think that at the previous firm, it was more of the investors who had that voice, respectively. But now that folks are coming to us and asking for advice, I can be a little bit more on the front line. And that's something that I feel really fulfilled doing.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
So are you a talent acquisition person by
trade? Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I think that that's a keen way to help founders and allow them to see the bigger picture at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm looking through a couple notes here to see if there's anything else.
Oh, no worries.
Do you have any other questions for me?
This has been really fruitful. I personally don't at the moment, but I think we got some really, really good sound bites and really, really good dialogue. And I really hope that founders do leverage this, because there are so many segues between that of working on a SEAL team versus in corporate.
There are. I mean, the SEAL teams, we call each other team guys. You're on a SEAL team. Yeah. It is really team focused. And I love every bit of knowing that you can rely on your team to support you and to make you a better version of you. It's kind of the ultimate of all of that. So
exactly. And again, back to that saying of you're only as strong as your weakest link. I think it's very important to leverage community to get that weakest link, so to speak, to become the strength in that wheel.